Welcome to the Betty Rocker Show, the place to be to nourish your mind, love your body, and rock your life. What's up, rock stars? Welcome back to the show. It is great to have you here as we dive back into how to see results faster. This is part 2. And I would say that one of the key reasons people don't see results from all their efforts is in large part because of disordered eating. We are so influenced by pop culture, by social media, by just overload of information. And it's often extremely tricky to know what is the right thing for you until you've tried a few things that simply aren't, right? I really believe that different things work for different people at different times. You'll probably hear me say that in a lot of different places. You know, one of the reasons that there are so many different diets and eating strategies out there is because of this very reason. There's different body types, our unique genetics, our goals and lifestyles. They can all contribute to what appeals most to us, what works for us, and really what gives us the best results. So just because a certain way of eating works for your husband or your best friend or your sister doesn't always mean it's going to work perfectly or the same for you. And it's easy to get a little obsessive about how this stuff works because we really want something to work. Maybe we saw a picture of someone who looks the way we want to look, and so we try to do everything they do, but we just continue to not see the results we're looking for. And this doesn't mean that the eating strategy doesn't work. It doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. It might not just be the right fit for you. I mean, with all our genetic differences, we have various food sensitivities. We have varying abilities to easily assimilate different foods, not to mention our current state of health and hormone balance, our gut health, how well we can absorb the nutrients we're eating, how our body is partitioning the nutrients that we're eating, and of course, the impact our stress levels could all be playing and why a dietary strategy isn't giving you the results you expect. So what do? The opposite of disorder is order. And in order to empower yourself to find out what the right approach for you is, I think we just have to be willing to experiment and keep track of our experiments. I think food intolerance testing is an excellent step in the right direction to start to customize your eating and get data on your unique body. You know, some people will do an elimination diet, which can be really helpful, removing common inflammatories like dairy and gluten, which can be a great place to start. But the point is to be aware that your body really is unique, and listening to how it responds to the food you take in is one of the most important communications you have every single day. Some of the signals your body will send you about the nutrients you're eating and the timing of your eating include your energy levels, your moods, your ability to think and focus, your digestive functions and how regular your bowel movements are, for example, how your stomach feels after a meal, and definitely how quickly you are responding to exercise and putting on muscle and losing fat if those are goals that you have. If you aren't feeling great in any of these areas, the first place to start is with something you have control over, and that's what you're choosing to eat each day. Like I was saying, there's no one perfect way to be eating for everybody, but the absolute bottom line for me is that when you base your food choices from whole, real foods and you start cooking more or relying on shortcuts with as near to what you would have made at home as possible. This is the most important foundation to applying your experiments with different dietary strategies to yourself. I actually have a friend, Alicia, who's an esthetician, and a while back she mentioned to me that she'd been feeling super frustrated because while her husband seemed to be able to drop weight and get shredded with what looked like zero effort, for her it was like a huge struggle, and no matter what she did, she just couldn't lose the extra pounds. Alicia's actually in her mid-20s and she works long hours at her job. And when I asked her if she takes breaks to eat, she told me she rarely does. She said she had been skipping breakfast because intermittent fasting was working so well for her husband, but even though she would normally not eat till the early evening when she got home, it was just not working for her. Remember when I said different things work for different people at different times? Intermittent fasting is just one eating strategy that I've seen some people swear by, and other people who end up having more mixed results or developing a little bit of disordered eating and more food obsession because of it. I've noticed that men often do very well with intermittent fasting. Some women do well too, and some women just need to be a little bit careful because our hormones can be more sensitive to our hunger and fullness signals. We also don't carry as much muscle as men do typically, meaning one of our reserve tanks for glucose, our muscles, isn't quite as abundant, which means that some of us just do better eating more regularly. There are also many different ways to apply intermittent fasting. And it sounded to me like even if Alicia was planning to do what her husband was doing and eat in a timed window, she was skipping breakfast and not eating all day long either, which was clearly not working well for her. So she wasn't really doing what he was doing and breaking his fast with a big lunch. So there's the application of the dietary strategy that simply might not work well for our lifestyle, even though we want to use it. And I wanted to know more, actually. So I asked her about the foods she was eating and when she did finally eat. I asked her first about protein. Was she making sure to include it in her meals? She immediately said, "Isn't that just for bodybuilders?" So I was able to explain that the amino acids and the protein we get from our foods are what form the building blocks for everything from hormone regulation and enzyme production to the regulation of muscle mass and body fat levels. Protein is also super important for healthy and vibrant skin, hair, nails, as well as a healthy immune system and metabolism that can efficiently burn that fat and keep you energized. And protein is actually more satisfying than carbs or fat, so mindfully including it in your meals can help you really regulate portion sizes and feel more full and satisfied after eating, which suppresses cravings that a lot of people deal with. I personally add a clean protein shake to the mix in my day because I'm super aware of just wanting to meet my protein needs, and it's also a super convenient, healthy shortcut. If you're looking for a good protein powder, go for organic whenever possible to avoid genetically modified foods, pesticides, and herbicide spray residue, and really just look closely at the ingredients and how much added sugar is in there. I actually ended up creating my own supplement company, Whole Betty, which you may have heard of already, because I just wanted more control over knowing exactly what was going into my body when it came to things like protein powders. And you can find all of my offerings over at thebettyrocker.com/supplements. So back to Alicia. I encouraged her to start bringing a shake to work with her because it was such an easy step to take that she could do even on a busy day. So she'd at least have some nutrients while she was working and expending all of her energy. I invited her to just start to notice where protein showed up in her meals and not to eat just protein or high protein, but to simply make sure protein was represented in all of her meals. I also suggested she use her phone and look up how much protein was in the food she was eating just to get a feel for the amount of grams she was getting per meal as a baseline now that she knew that she should include it on purpose. Okay, so the next time we got together, Alicia shared that she had made some improvements and she was actually bringing protein mixed with fruit as a smoothie with her to work. And as a result, she was feeling like she had a little more energy, but she still had horrible cravings at night and her energy was still erratic. She admitted that some days she barely had time to drink her shake at work and she was just so hungry by the time she went home, she felt almost sick. She said that when she finally ate, she just had trouble controlling her portions and her choices. So why was she gaining weight? One reason was that because she waited so long to eat, she would just gorge herself and she was secretly giving herself permission to eat more because she hadn't eaten all day. So she would just inadvertently overeat, which she clearly was admitting, saying she had trouble with portion control. She'd also end up eating a lot of excess sugar because at that point she felt like it was okay since she hadn't eaten all day. This to me is kind of the epitome of disordered eating, where we're depriving ourselves and rewarding ourselves with food, being in an uncontrollable cycle that we then kind of beat ourselves up about and we try to punish ourselves by eating less. But the cycle just repeats and repeats and we have all of this guilt and shame when it's coming to food, and that's just a horrible way to feel about something that's so important and our nourishment. So I realized that even though morning was the one time of day that Alicia had a couple of hours to herself, before work, she wasn't eating anything then because she was just convinced that if she just didn't eat, she'd lose the weight because she was still stuck on doing intermittent fasting since her husband was seeing such great results. But she really wasn't applying that strategy effectively, due to the timing of her schedule and the demands of her job. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with intermittent fasting or anything wrong with Alicia. It was just that it wasn't a great fit for her at that time of her life. So I asked her as her next experiment to just try out having breakfast before work, since For her lifestyle and work schedule, this was a time she actually had more time to herself, and potentially that might set her up with some more energy reserves for the day ahead. As we talked about, what is a good breakfast option? We talked about things like overnight oatmeal, eggs with a delicious whole grain bread on the side, like my homemade buckwheat bread or something that she could purchase. I realized that she was really afraid to eat carbs. She was just super worried she was going to gain weight because she always believed carbs were bad. And she was also really worried about the fat from grass-fed butter that I invited her to spread on her toast. And she was also worried about the fat from the egg yolks. She had just been relying a lot more on processed sort of fat-free and low-carb foods up until this point without a good idea of what was actually in them or how they were helping or harming her. Now, whether you do better genetically on higher fat and lower carb diet or a higher carb and lower fat diet. And by the way, that's something worth tracking your intake around to see how you feel and how you respond. The carbs we eat really should be divided into categories. One being whole food carbs, which are foods that come from the earth, like whole grains, legumes, fruit, and fibrous vegetables. And the other being what I call empty carbs, which are pre-made foods that often have sugar added, or pre-made foods that simply turn into sugar in your body, like foods made from white flour with no redeeming qualities like healthy fat or fiber to slow down how quickly that sugar hits your bloodstream. While both the whole food carbs and the sugary carbs break down into glucose that your body can use for energy, whole food carbs come complete with many essential micronutrients like vitamins and minerals and that fiber I just mentioned, and some other macronutrients like protein and fat, which also helps slow down the rate at which your body uses the sugar, helping to keep your energy more stable. And most of the glucose from your food is sent to your bloodstream, which makes your blood sugar rise. Rising blood sugar signals your pancreas to produce the hormone insulin, which helps your cells take in the glucose. Some of your cells use the glucose for energy. Other cells, like the cells in your liver and muscles, store the extra glucose you don't need for immediate energy as glycogen, which your body can call in later in between meals so you have steady energy. Any extra glucose that your body can't store in your liver and muscle tissue is going to get stored as fat. So a while after you've eaten, say 4 to 6 hours, the glucose levels in your blood are going to decrease, which signals your pancreas once again, but this time it produces glucagon. This hormone signals your liver and muscle cells to change the stored glycogen back into glucose and release it back into your bloodstream so your other body cells can use it for energy. This whole loop is always running. It keeps your blood sugar levels from dropping too low and makes sure your body has a steady supply of energy. Whole foods tend to not spike your blood sugar as rapidly, and it's just one of the many great reasons to be including them more frequently in your daily intake. Not to mention they contain those helpful vitamins and minerals that are well absorbed by the body. For example, whole oats are the only food source of avenathramides, a unique group of antioxidants believed to protect against heart disease. They also contain manganese, important for development, growth, and metabolism, phosphorus, vitamin B1, copper, iron, selenium, magnesium, and zinc. Now you know why I love my overnight oatmeal. And I make it from the whole oat groat, not the processed, pressed, heat-treated rolled oat. I want the food as close to its natural source as possible to reap the spectrum of benefits of its fiber, energy, and bonus micronutrients. And of course, I'm soaking, sprouting, or fermenting any of my grains that I'm eating to help my body more easily assimilate those nutrients. With something like candy, it's pretty obvious that you're eating sugar. But what really derails and confuses so many people, Alicia included, is the sugar that gets added to so many of the quote-unquote regular foods that they're eating. The glucose that we get from foods like white flour, bread, and pasta, many pre-made cereals, and foods that just straight up have sugar added, don't really provide the same bang for your buck in nutrient density. And with the absence of the fiber to slow down the speed at which the glucose hits your bloodstream, these processed foods are just shoveling sugar into your body that's just getting stored as fat. Marketing can be really tricky, and there's so many mixed messages consumers have to contend with. For example, one of my biggest pet peeves with fat-free yogurt is that in order to make the yogurt fat-free but still taste good, extra sugar is almost always added. So you're actually eating sugary, empty carbs. It's not the healthy, satisfying fat in the yogurt that creates body fat storage. It's the extra added sugar that adds up over the course of your day that your body can't use for energy. So it just packages it up as fat. And your goal, probably when you bought that fat-free yogurt, was clearly the opposite. It was to be fat-free, but you're ending up with the opposite result, which is fat storage. Side note on eating healthy fat, fat is a very satiating nutrient. Including it on purpose can actually promote fat loss and weight stabilization because the more satisfied you are with your meals from the nutrient density in your food, the less hungry you are after eating, and the easier it is to stop eating when you're full. So to recap, when insulin is doing its job, it's shuttling the glucose from your meals into the cells for energy, into the liver and muscle tissue for storage, and then the remainder into your fat cells. Okay, so storing fat isn't the most desirable thing for those of us who want to be lean, but it is a very efficient system that the body does for us. And what happens when that system stops working because we've overtaxed it is a condition called insulin resistance, which is actually a precursor to type 2 diabetes. And insulin resistance is what happens when the cells stop allowing glucose to enter. If insulin is the key that unlocks the cell to allow glucose in, insulin resistance is what happens when the key gets jammed and can't unlock the door anymore. If you can't get glucose into your cells, you're storing more body fat and you won't have energy, which is why people who develop insulin resistance often feel tired and they're hungry after every single meal. Once insulin resistance develops, the muscles, the fat, the liver cells, none of those respond to it properly, which leads to this chain reaction in the body that impacts the effectiveness and balance of other hormones as well. So here's Alicia over here trying to eat healthy by eating low fat because she believed fat would, quote unquote, make her fat. She's skipping meals, so she didn't eat too many carbs because she believed carbs would, again, make her fat. She's skipping protein, so she didn't turn into a bodybuilder, in her words, and instead she's relying on a lot of processed foods that contained more sugar and less actual nutrients. And as a result, she had a lot more fat on her body than she was comfortable with. She had very low energy. Her hair had started falling out more than usual, and she mentioned she was worried about being able to get pregnant. That was concerning as well because a diet high in sugar can have a significant effect on the reproductive hormones. Let's dive deeper into some more of the damaging impact of added sugar right after this quick break. Did you know that the American Heart Association recommends no more than 25 grams of added sugar per day for women? It's 36 grams for men. And too much added sugar clearly increases our fat storing and can also lead to visceral fat accumulation. Visceral fat is stored in the abdominal cavity near our vital organs, and it can also build up in the arteries. It's not easily seen, but it can contribute to an increase in rapid blood pressure and can contribute to insulin resistance as well. Too much added sugar intake can also worsen cognitive decline, harm your kidneys, and cause cavities. It increases heart disease risk factors, some of which we've mentioned already, including obesity and high blood pressure. But it also increases inflammation in your body, which suppresses your immune system, making you more likely to get sick more often. It can also cause your androgen, aka sex hormone levels, to rise, which can increase skin oil production and contribute to acne. It can accelerate skin aging and wrinkle formation, which, is a total bummer. And speaking of aging, too much added sugar can contribute to cell aging and shorten the lengths of our telomeres, which are important protective structures, sort of like end caps on our chromosomes that help ensure DNA replication is performed effectively. Alicia and I were really taking small steps together with the suggestions I had been giving her. She had started paying attention to her protein intake. Then she started eating breakfast. And I also invited her to just start looking at her food labels for how much added sugar was in the foods she was consuming. This little activity gave her a ton of insight in some of the choices she'd been making and really helped her make better ones. Her next step was to just start getting more familiar with the macronutrients represented in her foods along with the added sugars. So, how much protein, how much fat, and how many carbohydrates were in the foods she was eating, plus how much sugar, especially added sugar. And as a bonus, I suggested she also check out what micronutrients her foods contained. Was there fiber? How about calcium? Was there iron? And which vitamins were they high in? Some of this wasn't on the labels of the food she bought, but she was easily able to look this information up on her phone. This was not so Alicia would start counting calories. This was so she would start to see what macronutrients were being represented in her daily choices and how she felt as she consumed them. Even if you decide to use calories as an eating strategy, be sure you're looking first at the macronutrients and the overall nutrient density of your food. Let's just take a quick peek at the difference between calories and macronutrients and why it's important. So a 5-ounce salmon fillet and a Snickers bar both contain about 230 to 245 calories. So they're roughly the same in the amount of calories that they contain. But if we take a closer look at the macronutrients, there are some really big differences. The salmon has 29 grams of protein. The Snickers bar contains 4 grams. Well, that sounds about right. I mean, the salmon's a piece of fish. After all, the Snickers bar is a piece of candy. The salmon has 12 grams of fat, and the Snickers bar contains 13 grams of fat. So they're actually pretty similar there. Here's the big difference. The salmon contains 0 grams of carbs, which is typical for fish. The Snickers bar contains 26 grams of carbs, 22 of which are added sugar. What was that number that we don't want to go over in a day for women of added sugar? It was 25 grams. That's right. So that Snickers bar alone was putting us dangerously high to our sugar intake for the day. And if we look at our overall caloric intake, if we were just focusing on our calories alone, we might miss that. And we might miss that really important connection that it's not just how many calories we're eating, it's really about the nutrients that are contained in the foods that we're eating that make the biggest difference to our body and our energy levels and how we're feeling. So obviously, the food that's going to impact your blood sugar more is the Snickers bar, and that's what's going to set you up for the fat storage. So I mentioned that the micronutrients are super important, and in that salmon fillet, you'd also get selenium, vitamin B12, B6, and B2, which is also known as riboflavin, among other things. And the Snickers bar contains just some trace minerals in small amounts, but it's mostly overshadowed by its sugar content. That's why meals can be described as containing empty calories or nutrient-dense calories. You might be eating the same number of calories overall, but it's what they're made up of that has the greatest impact on your health and how your body responds. And this brings me back to my original point about you seeing results. Sometimes we just want someone to tell us what to do because it just all seems so confusing. We don't have time to go through this huge process, or it's just hard to stick to the guidelines. But even outside of all of the different diets, just starting small with something as simple as tracking how much sugar you're consuming throughout the day and making sure you're keeping that added sugar to less than 25 grams can be a game changer. Doing something else small, like noticing if you're getting protein throughout your meals in the day and taking steps to correct that if you're not, can be a game changer. Noticing how you feel after you eat certain foods that are common gut irritants like gluten, dairy, even eggs for some people. That can be a really good way to start to determine how your body is responding. And just keeping track of your experiments with different dietary approaches, as well as the things you leave out or add in for a period of time, can be really beneficial for long-term insights into what works best for you. And it can show you why your results may be stalling. And this is the first step I would take, just tracking what you're doing right now. Track how that's making you feel. Make small changes that seem easy before doing a whole lifestyle overhaul. We're all in that habit of doing all or nothing, but apply all or something here. This might be a great time to get a food intolerances test or to work with someone to support you. I just really find starting small and understanding how stuff works to be a really valuable and empowering activity. That's why if you get my eating guide like the Body Fuel System, you'll find a ton of information about the micro and macronutrients to put the why we do things behind the how we can do them, because I find it way more helpful to take action when I understand why I'm doing things, and it's a lot easier to just shift how I'm doing things when I understand why. It's just a lot easier. Any guide should be taken as a great suggestion for you, but your own body and how it responds, and it's really the highest authority. Learning to just tune into the signals your body's sending you and taking steps to optimize how you feel is just really key in your success. All this to me is just empowering you with options that put control back into your hands and help you turn any disordered eating into a more orderly personal experiment where you're making choices based on the knowledge you have about how food works in your body and then the insights you get from noticing how your body responds. That way you're not guessing all the time or trying to apply a one-size-fits-all approach to your unique body. And hey, if you're eager to save money because a healthy lifestyle just seems so expensive, in next week's episode with Dr. Terry Walls, we'll talk about how some of the best ways to eat for optimal health on a budget really are to make your own food as much as possible. Shop the outer aisles of the grocery store, buy food in season, and spend some of your time just making meals for yourself rather than wasting money on a lot of convenience foods that end up being very inconvenient to your health and probably your pocketbook in the long run. So I'm really excited for next week's episode because Dr. Walls, she has an amazing story. She actually reversed her own multiple sclerosis that had left her wheelchair bound for 4 years using a combined functional medicine and custom dietary approach. And she shares exactly what she did and many of her specific health and nutrition strategies in this conversation that you'll leave with great tips and insights you can apply to yourself right away. I can't wait for you to listen to that, so stay tuned, and I really look forward to hearing what you learned today and any insights you got, any steps you're planning to take after this, and any clues you got about, how to speed up results for yourself or maybe some things that are sort of slowing them down. You can find all the notes and resources for today's show on the show notes page over on thebettyrocker.com/podcast. And most importantly, when it comes to seeing results faster with your training efforts, take action on the 4 pillars of health. Along with exercising regularly, get good quality sleep, get nutrient-dense meals in throughout your day, and pay attention to your stress and take action to reduce it. Keep these 4 pillars in mind and pursue them with consistency for the best results. I'm Betty Rocker, and you are so awesome and amazing. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your amazing reviews on iTunes and on all of the podcast players you've been listening on. I really, really appreciate it, and I really look forward to our next conversation. I'll talk to you again real soon. Bye for now.
This podcast is for information purposes only. Statements and views expressed on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Brie Argetsinger, Betty Rocker Inc., and the producers disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. Before starting a new exercise, fitness or health protocol, or if you think you have a medical problem, always consult a licensed physician.